This video will show you how to add a self-destruct function to your avatar. To begin, you will want to make a particle effect that looks good for the explosion. Right-click your avatar, Effects, Particle System. Rename this to Explosion or whatever else you want to name it, and click on the object to bring its data up in the inspector. To begin with, let's make it emit its particles in a fashion that is more akin to an explosion. Scroll down to Shape and change it from cone to sphere. This will cause it to shoot out in all directions from a central point. Next, let's make it so that it emits all of its particles in one burst rather than shooting a bunch of them out over time. Set the rate over time to 0 and add a burst with the plus button down here. 30 probably won't be enough particles for our purpose. I would recommend 250. We want to make these particles slow down as they get to the end of their lifetime. So, we will turn on Limit Velocity over Lifetime, expand the tab, and change these settings to affect how they will slow down, at what speed, how quickly, etc. I've done some testing already for a decent explosion animation, and I have found that speed 0.5 and dampen 0.1 work best. The speed field will dictate the maximum speed particles can end up at. 0.5 means that it goes fairly slow, but it isn't stopped entirely. Dampen will determine how much of its speed is lost every tick. At 0.1, that means 10% of its speed is reduced until it reaches the 0.5 speed target. Now let's make it look more like a fiery explosion. Turn on Color over Lifetime, expand the tab, and click the arrow to the right of this color bar to select Random Between Two Gradients. This way you can have two different colors rather than just one, which makes it look substantially better. Click the first color bar, select the arrow at the bottom left, then click this color bar, and set it to a nice yellow. For the bottom right arrow, set it to a more blackish gray to make it look like smoke. Then select the top right arrow and reduce the alpha to 0. This will make it so that it goes from a bright yellow to a dim gray over time and eventually disappears. Do the same to the other color bar, but use more of an orange for this one. Set the bottom right to gray, and the top right to alpha 0. We want to make the fire and smoke look like it disperses over a larger area over time, so click on Size over Lifetime, expand the tab, and click on the graph. If Particle System Curves is not shown for you, click on it at the bottom of the screen here to bring it up. Right-click this bottom point here, Edit key, and set the value to 0.25. This will make it start a little bit larger than 0. With these basic parameters set, scroll up to the top of the particle effect, go to Start Speed, and click the arrow to the right, setting it to Random Between Two Constants. By setting the start speeds to 1 and 8, we can ensure that the spread of particles is much more random, akin to an explosion. Do the same with Start Lifetime, selecting Random Between Two Constants and setting a good value for each. This will further increase the randomness of the explosion. You may notice now that some of the particles are still alive by the time the next explosion goes off. To remedy this, go to Duration and set it from 5 seconds to 10 seconds. This ensures that the loop from emission only occurs once every 10 seconds. These particles aren't nearly large enough to look like a good explosion, so go to Start Size and set it to 8. That looks much better. Smoke rises, so go to the Gravity modifier and set it to -0.1. This will cause the smoke to rise as it nears the end of its lifetime. Set the simulation space to world instead of local. If it's on local, it will follow your avatar when you begin to move. When set to world, it will stay in the location you were when you exploded. Lastly, though not entirely necessary, set the max particles to 250 for the sake of VRChat's performance rating. Let's add a little bit more to this explosion. Scroll down to sub-emitters, expand the tab, turn it on, and click the plus button next to the None Particle System box. This will automatically create a sub-emitter underneath the explosion object in the hierarchy. Click the sub-emitter and change it to Sparks. Right now, it plays a new particle for every single part of the smoke from the explosion. Go down to Emission, and instead of rate over time, set that to 0. Give it a burst that has a count of 1. Deactivate Shape, as this is unnecessary for this sub-emitter. Scroll up and set the start speed to another random between two constants. We will want something fast, let's say 10 to 15. These sparks don't last very long, so let's increase the start lifetime to 3. Under Start Color, click the arrow and select Random between two colors. We'll go with a similar color scheme to the explosion itself, a yellow and an orange. These currently don't look very spark-like, so let's set the gravity modifier to 1. Now let's add a trail. Scroll down to the Trails tab, turn it on, expand it, and set the lifetime to 0.2. Untick Die with Particles so that it doesn't end so abruptly. Scroll down to the renderer, expand it, and for the trail material, select the default particle. Currently, this is way more sparks than we actually want, so scroll back up to Emission and set the probability of the burst to 0.1. This will make it so that only 1/10 of the particles are emitted. These sparks are a bit large, so back up at the top of the particle system, we will set the start size to 0.1. Make sure to set the simulation speed to world. As one last tweak, let's make it so that these sparks will bounce off of the ground and other surfaces. Scroll down to Collision, turn it on and expand it, and set the type from Planes to World. Let's set the dampen to 0.25. This means that it will lose 25% of its speed anytime it hits a surface. Bounce can probably be reduced as well. Let's go 0.75. Please note that it's okay if your sparks aren't bouncing in your Unity preview. The reason they're doing so for me is that I have created a floor object here with a box collider for them to hit. This is unnecessary for your avatar and is just for displaying how the bouncing will work. Now that we have a particle system set up, click on it in the hierarchy and deactivate it. The next step is setting up the animation to have this explosion play. Navigate to wherever you hold your animations. Right-click in the box here, Create Animation. We'll name this Explosion. Click and drag it onto your avatar. Click the avatar in the hierarchy, and bring up the Animation tab. If it's not currently visible, go to Window, Animation, Animation. Find the animation that you just created in the drop-down menu here. Click the lock icon to ensure that this animation doesn't go away when you click on other things in the hierarchy. Click Record, go to the explosion object in your hierarchy, and turn it on. This will make the particle effect play immediately, in-game. However, since we're self-destructing, we shouldn't exist anymore. Go to the body of your avatar and unclick the Skinned Mesh Renderer. This will disable your appearance, making it seem as though you exploded and vanished. We want to make this animation last for the entire duration of the particle effect. So zoom out of your animator until you reach the point where the timer matches the length of your particle duration. We went with 10 seconds for this one, so go to the 10-second mark, and while record is still selected, turn off the object. Unclick record and preview. We're now ready to set up the programming that will go into initiating this self-destruct. Click the Project tab and find wherever your animators are located. If you don't know their specific location, you can click on your avatar, scroll down until you see the Playable Layers section, and click the FX Animator. Double-click this icon to bring up the Animator tab. Click the plus button on the left side of the window that appears in the viewport. This will add a new layer. Name it Explosion, or whatever else you want your self-destruct to be named, and click the gear icon. Set the weight to 1, otherwise the animation won't play, period. Make sure the explosion layer is selected, then right-click in this grid, Create State, Empty. This one will be named Weight. It doesn't need a motion attached, as this is just a state to wait for you to use the self-destruct. Right-click in the grid again, Create State, Empty, and name this one the Explosion. With this animator state selected, go to the Motion field, click the circle, and find the explosion animation that you created. Double-click it to assign it to this animator state. The criteria for triggering this explosion is entirely up to you. However, here are a few different methods you could use. One would be a button in your expression wheel. To set this up, you'll want to access your parameters list. If you don't know where that is, you can click your avatar, scroll down, and find the Parameters section of the Expressions field. Click that, double-click your parameters, and click Add. Set this to Explode, or whatever else you want to name it, and set the type to a Boolean. Next, go to your menu, which you can find the same way as the parameters. Add control, expand it, set the name to whatever you want it to appear as in-game. We'll go with Explode for this one. And you'll likely want to keep it as a button. Click the Parameter dropdown and set it to the Boolean that you just created. Now, go back to your FX animator. Click the Parameters tab, then the plus button, Boolean. Set this to the same name as what you wrote out for the parameters list. Go to Layers, and back to your explosion layer. Right-click the Weight state, make Transition, and left-click Explosion. Click the arrow that appears, and expand the settings. For the transition to the explosion, we want it to be instant, so uncheck the Has Exit Time box, and set the transition duration to 0. Scroll down to the Conditions field, press plus, and set the parameter to Explode is True. Now, upon clicking the Explode button in your expression wheel, you will automatically self-destruct. Next, we need to be able to return to normal after the self-destruct has finished. Right-click Explosion, make Transition, left-click Wait. Click the arrow, and this time we will want to set the exit time to 1. This will ensure that it plays the entire animation all the way through and then moves back to the wait state. Set transition duration to 0, and you're done. You don't need any conditions for this transition, as it simply needs to move back once the animation is complete. This version of self-destruct is now ready to go. You can access your VRChat control panel, build and test, and take a look at how it looks in-game. Now, instead of a button, let's say you prefer to use hand gestures. In your FX animator, go to the Parameters tab, click the plus, add a new integer, and make it Gesture Left with that exact capitalization. Make another integer for Gesture Right. Now, in the explosion layer, make a transition from wait to explosion. Click the arrow, deactivate Has Exit Time, set the transition duration to 0, and decide what gestures you want to use to trigger this explosion. Let's say you want to use the same gesture on both hands to do this. Set the first condition parameter to gesture left equals a number indicating the gesture you want to use. For reference, 0 is the neutral hand position, 1 is a fist, 2 is open hand, 3 is pointing, 4 is peace sign, 5 is rock and roll, 6 is finger guns, and 7 is thumbs up. Regardless of your selection, click the plus button to add another parameter condition. Set this one to gesture right equals whatever you want that gesture to be. This setup will trigger the explosion whenever both of your hands are in the thumbs up position. Create another transition from explosion to wait, and set this one to have 1 exit time and 0 transition duration. As with the previous method, this makes it return to the wait state as soon as the animation has completed. Finally, I'll show you how I trigger my self-destruct personally. It's a fair bit more complicated than these other methods, but is much more difficult to trigger accidentally. Instead of just 2 states, I use 3. So I'll create 2 more states in this grid, naming the first one Prep 1 and the second Prep 2. These do not require any motions attached to them. From wait to Prep 1, the transition has no exit time or transition duration, and requires that gesture left and gesture right both be 1 for fist. Next, from Prep 1 to Prep 2 is largely the same thing, except in this case, I make it so that the gestures have to be in thumbs up mode, which is 7. Finally, to trigger the explosion, I put my thumbs back down into fist mode. Like the other methods, this requires a transition back to wait with an exit time of 1 and a transition duration of 0. However, you also need to return to wait when your hands are not in the thumbs up or fist positions. So, create a transition from Prep 1 to wait with no exit time, no transition duration, and the conditions that gesture left does not equal 1 for fist, or 7 for thumbs up. Right-click Prep 1 again and make another transition to wait. The transition line will change to have 3 arrows on it. When you click on the line, you will find that there are multiple transitions in a list at the top of the inspector. The bottom one is the one that you already set up, but the top one is the new one that you just made. Change this one to have no exit time or transition duration, and add gesture right to this instead of gesture left. The numbers are the same. We want it to move back to wait when your right hand is not in fist or thumbs up. Do the same with transitions from Prep 2 to wait. While this is much more complicated to set up, it's also much more secure in that you won't accidentally trigger the self-destruct when you don't intend to. With that, your basic self-destruct is fully set up. However, you could also add a sound effect to give it that little bit much more oomph. Find an explosion sound you like online, preferably not a WAV file, as these are very high quality and high size. You can get by just fine with an MP3 file. Right-click in your File Explorer at the bottom of the screen, Import New Asset, and locate the sound file that you have saved. Click Import. Drag the file from your Explorer onto the explosion object. This automatically adds an audio source component to the explosion object. In the audio source, ensure that spatial blend is set all the way to 3D Otherwise, it will play for the entire map. Scroll down, set volume roll-off to linear roll-off, and set the max distance to something more manageable. I would go 10 at the absolute maximum. By turning on the explosion object, you can see how far the audio source will reach. This outer bubble is the furthest away someone can be and still hear the explosion. This inner bubble shows how far away it will play at maximum volume. When you go to upload the avatar, make sure that the explosion object is turned off. With that, your self-destruct is finished. Feel free to activate it whenever someone dares to boop or headpat you. For anyone who's interested, I do take commissions for adding tools to your avatar, as well as providing tutoring for adding any of these things yourself. Avatar features are often a lot more personalized than a tutorial can cover. So if you want something more specific, asking me directly is probably the best way to get it done. If these services interest you, contact me at toolboxmotley #0372 on Discord, and we can work out a price. Enjoy your explosions.